あ、ここいるんだ。
本当？見えないでしょ？どこにいるのかな？見えないよ。
I miss you.
What's good, Internet? It is November 14th, and you are listening to Waypoint Radio. I am your host, Austin Walker. Joining me as ever in the bunker, Danielle Riendeau.
Still very happy to be in a bunker.
Out there somewhere among the digital pyramids, Patrick Klepek.
I want to get a soundboard, so when you say Waypoint Radio, I go like,
Once I'm not, sick, I'll have to do my full, DJ Professor K, Jet Set Radio,
there you go.
shout out. That's what I need to do once I'm not still under the weather a little bit. How are your weekends? We're in it. We're here. We survived.
Back. My weekend was awesome. I guess I'll start. I attended GamerX
Right.
East. It was the very first. There have been 4 GamerXs on the West Coast in California, and
This
they
is GAYMERX.
yes, it's a queer LGBTQ inclusive gaming conference. It's not like you have to be gay to go there, but
Right.
there's plenty of other folks. But it's a very welcoming, very queer friendly, very queer positive kind of space for gaming. And there are panels. It's sort of like a little mini PAX. There are panels. Austin and I were both on a panel on Saturday night with Pat Bear 404 in it, which was it's always fun. And also, if Giant Bomb folks probably know a little bit about that.
People know about
I
Pat Bear.
imagine.
People know about 404.
I imagine they know about the Bear Cave.
It's true.
So that was very fun. And I was on another panel on Sunday about failing and learning from failure and sort of, crappy first drafts and then sort of making yourself a better person through that. And that was all fun. And it's also just a fun, very safe space to kind of hang out. Lots of folks come who might not be comfortable at a bigger conference or a less sort of super queer friendly conference. So
And that feels like it was probably super well needed or super
it was
appreciated this
it
weekend.
really was. Catherine Cross gave the sort of closing statements, and she's just this fiery speaker, just incredibly intelligent academic and critic, and she just really. She brought the house down with a speech that was people were like, I think you should run for office next. It was very much about, art and community and how those things are ever more important in times like this. So it was very, very positive and a really wonderful way to spend a weekend after the week we all had. So yeah.
That sounds amazing. I was there for one day and I had a really great time.
Yeah.
I was supposed to also go to another event and I was just so sick and so out of it for almost all of the weekend that I kind of retreated to my shell. And in this scenario,
fair. Yeah.
I am a turtle in this scenario and have a shell. And I played some games, so we'll get to that in a little bit. Patrick, what about you? What was your weekend like?
Yeah, I mean, I just walked away from everything. We had family in town,
Cool.
which was like a nice respite from, it's just you can't check Twitter, you can't read message boards. It was because I know I don't have the will. I'll tell myself I might even tweet about I'm going to walk away from Twitter this weekend, and then immediately look at Twitter.
An hour later.
I just I just don't have the willpower, especially currently, to do that, even if it's for my own better interest. But so we had family in town to visit with Jessica, and so it was nice because there was just sort of an agreed upon, we're not going to talk about the last week, and why don't we talk about other nice things that are happening in everyone's lives. And that part was nice. I enjoyed it.
Totally. That sounds really good. You didn't get a chance to play anything over the weekend?
I did, yeah. I finished Infinite Warfare,
Oh, cool.
which continues to be a game that I, as I mentioned on Friday, I think is a much stronger campaign than people will probably not necessarily not get around to giving it credit for, but I think people are there's a lot of people are tired of Call of Duty, and I think are unwilling to give it a chance in the ways that people might have in the past. I think shooters are in large ways doing interesting things in other franchises and in other ways. So I think people at this point kind of just write off Call of Duty, and it's the thing you buy every year for the multiplayer, but you're not really going to get into it for the single player as much anymore. And this one is a really strong one. I think the story doesn't go anywhere by the end, but I think it has a really strong character arc. And as I mentioned on Friday, and it does this really fascinating thing at the end, without getting into sort of the the details of it. Basically, unsurprisingly, people that you fight along with die along the way, and
it is a war. It is a
war, a space war, as they say. And
is that a thing that they say in that world? Do they say like
no?
It's the space war.
I want it to be though.
Okay.
I want it to be a thing. But when the credits are rolling, and usually in a game like Call of Duty or even a Ubisoft game, that is where I'm just, as much as I'm thankful for the people that spent many hours building this game, like your credit sequences are like 20, 30 minutes long.
Right.
And this game actually gives you something to do during the credits, which is for all the people who died during the course of the game, because you're in the military. I'm not sure if this is actually true in the military or this is just a conceit they built into Infinite Warfare, but if you are killed in action, there's a sort of a letter written home to your family, and so this on the screen comes up with all the characters that died during the course of the campaign, and then you get to hear sort of their letter that they're writing home to their family, sort of like their closing thoughts on their life to the people.
Does that manage to give them like characterization? Does it come across as heavy-handed?
It's not heavy-handed, and the characterization is actually, I wish a lot of that stuff had found its way into the game. It reads as all in some it's really powerful. I thought, at least in the context that it's put in, but it also felt like, oh, we have all these characters are far more interesting than I even already knew,
right.
But there was no way to put it into the game, and so it works really well in terms of being this sort of a something to do during the credits, and gives a lot of color and interesting context to the characters. Like, you discover one of them was estranged from his father, and it's like that might have been an interesting detail
right.
throughout the course of the campaign, but it didn't find its way in there. Which is too bad, because the way the sort of general setup for Infinite Warfare happens is it's a little bit like Wing Commander,
right?
In which, like, in between missions, you go back to a ship hub. And part of what I loved about the Wing Commander series, or this, I guess, Mass Effect is maybe the more contemporary analog for this, is you go back to a hub area and then you talk to the people who are in your crew, and that gives this wonderful opportunity to learn more about them that maybe doesn't come up in the combat scenarios, but it shades that stuff in a way that is useful. And Infinite Warfare had this perfect opportunity to do that, because all these people are there, but it doesn't do anything with that. And it seems like they had come up with these. Even, like I said, I enjoy the character arcs in Infinite Warfare, even if I'm sort of grading it on a curve. Or on a curve rather, but they had this opportunity they clearly developed characters that had way more depth than even is granted throughout the course of the campaign, and they found a way to get that into it at the end, but it both made it more interesting in retrospect and also bummed me out in retrospect, because it would have made the sequences where, for example, these characters are killed a lot more powerful, because you would have known a little bit more about sort of why they were fighting and who they were thinking about in those final moments.
Yeah, it's a shame that didn't. That feels like it goes back to a question we got a few weeks ago, which was like, what is the hierarchy of writer, designer, coder, etc. And I wish that stuff would have been part of the core design of the game, to where let's make this home base a place where lots of characterization happens. That seems again in the post Mass Effect world, that seems like a gimme in some senses.
Yeah, especially if you're making, this game clearly wanted to have, sort of like meaningful characters. Like, they weren't supposed to just be fodder on the fringes to just be killed. And so they kind of made a step in that direction, but then didn't take it, I think, all the way, or at least, kind of like I've echoed a couple of times in games I've played recently, where it just feels like a missed opportunity, where it's easy to say, it's also easy for me to sit on my perch and say, like, well, why did you just do this? And often I wish, these are moments where I wish developers were a little more open of like, well, here's how we made this decision and how we arrived at it.
We tried it, and then this happened, or like, here was a limitation that you could never have known because you're not an expert on this one thing. Like, oh yeah, okay, cool, interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess, having finished that game, I would still say to people, if you aren't interested in the multiplayer, like, I'm not necessarily going to argue that it's worth $60 to jump in right now, but something to keep in mind for, like, in the spring, if things slow down, like, oh, hey, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, is on sale on Steam. Like, it is absolutely worth playing, and I really did enjoy my time with it. Otherwise, I jumped into the first couple of hours of Dishonored 2, which I was apprehensive about just because I had heard pretty nasty things about the PC version.
Yeah.
I will say it's not nearly as bad as has necessarily been prescribed. That's also, a bit of your mileage may vary.
Based on your
right?
build,
some
right?
People's,
Yeah.
I have a slightly above. I have a GTX 970, so like I have a decent card, but one that is beginning to move into sort of like the middle of the pack in terms of what it's capable of doing. There's clear optimization stuff they can do with the PC version just to color it for people a little bit. Like, I'm getting 60 frames a sec. Like, here's a good example. It's like I could be staring at a globe in an empty room where there is no dynamic AI or environmental stuff happening, and I'm getting a solid 60 frames a second. And I'm not someone that is 60 or bust. I'm just using this to illustrate sort of the fluctuation. And then I spin a globe, which is just a little item that you can interact with, and then it drops to like 45. So it's like the game shouldn't be losing 15 frames a second when you spin a little static globe, which probably means there's some stuff they can hopefully fix. But otherwise, I could not be happier to be back in the depressing world of Dunwall. Or I guess where the new place you're in is Car. I haven't heard it enough times to remember what it is.
Not Karnak. That's not right. That's no.
It's a K, though.
Land.
Yeah. It is a K word, isn't it? Karnaka.
Yeah.
Karnaka.
Yeah. It just feels good to be back in there. Like, immediately I'm slipping back into, all my old stylings and how I played the original game. And, I haven't gotten far enough to really have too much to say about it, except that it feels like more Dishonored.
It sure does.
That's not something I'm going to complain about.
Who are you playing as?
Oh, as much as I want to play as Corvo, as much as I liked Corvo, it's just like playing as Emily is way too tempting. And I'm curious to find out from other folks how much that is different. I know that the powers obviously are a differentiator between those two characters, but given the way that they set up the storyline for Emily, I'm like incredibly curious to see how that changes if you play as him.
Right,
Yeah.
Me too. I think I'll go back to it at some point and even just see the intro and see how that stuff goes differently. Have you started it, Danielle?
Not yet, but I do have it, and
Okay. We'll have to wrap back around. Like, once we have some more time,
Friday
maybe this
it'll be-
weekend, we'll actually have some Dishonored time where we can wrap back around. I spent most of the weekend recovering from being sick, but then also late last night, like 11:30, I was like, I really want to talk about Watch Dogs 2 because I played, like, at that point I'd played, let's say, 5 or 6, something like that, hours in the previous week, which is not nothing. But I was like, I want to see if my impressions so far are accurate for the next couple of hours. I expected to go to bed around like 12:30, and then I went to bed at like 4, which...
A really good thing to do when you're sick.
Oh, it's so good. It's so... Well, I'm doing the thing when I'm sick, which is like... I'm basically better. And like, no, doc, you're super not better. You need to be asleep. You need to be. But I'm really happy I kept playing because I think I really like Watch Dogs 2. Now, like, the caveat here, if it feels like there's a caveat, is because I feel like I've been burned so many times by Ubisoft open world games where it's like, oh man, the first act, I really liked this. And then by the middle of Act 2, I'm like, I'm just bored, or all of the interesting character development was up top or whatever. But there's a lot here, and I think so much of it revolves around the cast of characters being enjoyable to be around in a way that I haven't felt. Like, maybe Black Flag, but I think better. I think it's way better than Black Flag in terms of like actually having characters I give a fuck about. Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, like is the go-to Ubisoft joint that I think actually bears comparison here. So the setup in Watch Dogs 2 is you play a guy named Marcus who is from Oakland. Who this is all opening 10 minutes stuff that I'm spoiling here. So Marcus was unfairly accused of committing a crime and put on probation because the algorithm said it was likely he did a thing. And so he wasn't like a felon, but he did have certain restrictions put on his life because of that. And because of that, he became a hacker and ends up joining up with DedSec. And like the intro was actually really weak. The intro of Watch Dogs 2 is super quick, and it's confusing how he very quickly gets in with this crew. Like maybe he was on an IRC channel with them, but it's not. But all of a sudden, it's you and this crew of hacker misfits. And everything that Watch Dogs 1 had a lot of problems, and I think most of them arose from a sort of cynicism. it was obviously a game that was going to be critical about like the surveillance state and about algorithms and about big data and all of that. But from that, all the characters are also deeply cynical. They all thought the world was broken. Most of them weren't invested in making it a better place. Aiden Pierce, the lead character for the majority of Watch Dogs 1, doesn't give a fuck about CTOS, really. Like, it's just a tool he can use. And that also was something that came into kind of material being in that game in a bunch of other ways, which was like, I've written about how like that's a world filled with people doing things like playing trumpets and having conversations, but you can never interact with them. Marcus can interact with people. Marcus can walk up to somebody in a board game store and be like, oh, is that new German board game? I really wish I had time to play that. Or like can have a conversation with someone about gentrification on the street, can pet dogs, like, and all of that stuff is nothing. Like, I understand that it's a layer, but it works as another method of characterization for Marcus, because I know who Marcus is besides a guy who like carries around a stun gun and sneaks into facilities. And that's huge. That's like a huge thing. And then the cast of characters is also like interesting to be around. It's you kind of have a running chat going with them at all times, or like in the middle of a mission they'll call you up. Obviously it's a video game, so you're talking to your pals, but that's like a huge separation from Watch Dogs 1, where your only real pals were like your depressed sister, who was depressed because you got her daughter killed, which is fair to be sad about that. Your like maniacal, homicidal criminal friend Jordy, who was the worst, and then like some other criminals. Like, no one was cool in Watch Dogs 1. Like, you never want to be around
Everybody
anybody.
was awful. Yeah.
Everybody was awful.
Yeah.
And Watch Dogs 2, like, everybody's really posy, and everyone is really like, how do we make this better? And so even the things like where you're breaking into someone to serve, like, you're breaking into CTOS to like watch someone, those things in Watch Dogs 1 were really like nihilistic and like, oh, this guy likes porn, he's bad. Like, that was like the or like, oh, this person's cheating on their partner, or like, it was all super negative shit. And here, when it happens at all, it happens very rarely. It happens in a way more focused way. It's like, okay, we're doing this as part of a mission. It's not just like collectibles around the world. Is you're going to break into someone's privacy. They end up being comedic in this way that's not dark comedy, but is like almost goofy. Danielle, I think there's a lot of you in this game. There's a lot of puns.
Good.
There's a lot of like, there are movie montages. Like, there are like, there's I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think that there is a heart throughout the first act of the game, at least, that is very warm. There's a scene. Like, the second thing that happens, the game starts, you're like, all right, I'm here, I do the tutorial, I go into my hacker crew, I meet my hacker crew, they're neat. Okay, they're like, go out in the world and find out some stuff we can do. So you go outside and you eavesdrop on somebody in the park, and they're like, oh, some stuff is happening. Before I could go do the mission that I'd eavesdropped to find, one of your pals, this guy Wrench, who's the one with like the goggles that light up and make different emoji or emoticons, he's like, you have to come back. The trailer for Cyber Driver 3 just dropped.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, what? Like, is this just like a fun like thing that they're saying? So I'll go back. Maybe there's a funny goof for me to go watch. So you go back to the home base, and there's a cutscene where like Wrench grabs you by the wrist and leads you to the couch, and you get really excited with him, and you're like, there's gonna be a lot of Marcus cross Wrench fanfic out there.
Good.
There's gonna be a lot, because they are very close friends. And like, they get super excited about this super cheesy, shitty movie that is like a parody of the first Watch Dogs movie. It's like fake Tom Cruise is a hacker in Chicago, and he's part of a group called like Death Sect instead of Dead Sec. And it's like pretty on point, and it's like, I don't know, like, all that stuff is really warm. And that to me changes the tone so much.
Yeah, there's something else I wanted to ask you about.
Totally.
So I used to live in San Francisco.
Totally.
For several years, and I miss it and I love it, but it seems like they actually wanted to do something with this, and they I think it's pretty set that it was kind of a failure with what they did with Chicago in the first game. I'm wondering how the stuff with like tech money and gentrification, if that's like a part of this
constant.
New game. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool,
so like
cool.
the big villain, Ian Williams, who writes for us sometimes. Sorry, it wasn't Ian. It was Cameron Kunzelman, who also writes for us sometimes, described the villain to me as like a really good blaxploitation villain, in that he's like a super rich white business dude who thinks he knows more than you about the world.
Perfect.
But he's like this really arrogant young tech bro. But more than the like, oh, here is the personification of the tech bro, it is things like the Google buses are running everywhere.
Sure.
There are characters in the world who do talk about gentrification. There is a character in Marcus's life who is a trans woman of color, and her transness is brought up, but not in a way that it is a joke or that is, nor is it meant to shock. She is trans. It's just incidental. It's incidental.
It's part of the world. Yeah.
It's not quite incidental. There's a line of quests that go after a mock Scientology group. And she is a councilwoman in the city and had previously been a target of theirs. And they used her transness as a weapon against her. And she's like, I don't give a fuck about that. Like, I'm bigger than that. Like, or she goes like, I wasn't moved. Like, I wasn't scared of that, or I wasn't wounded by that. Like, she's like pretty fucking tough. And there's actually tension between her and Marcus, not because of her transness, but because he kind of feels like she went straight and like sold out and became a councilwoman and used to be a hacker, used to be in the underground in some other way. There is an autistic character in your crew, and I was like very much like, oh my god, they're gonna fuck this up.
Please do this right. Yeah.
Please do this right.
If you told me that, I would just delete the game and not even want to see how they do it.
And then so there's like for the first like hour, I was like, oh, they're gonna fuck this up so bad. They're gonna fuck this up so bad. And then he lands a joke that is like the sort of joke that a lot of my autistic friends would make, not on his own expense, but on the like, you fucking get it. Like you figured out you read the social space. Like, you're actually deeply aware of trying to figure out how to get into the social space right and make a really poignant joke, and like nailed it. And then there's actually a really poignant moment later on where that character believes they fucked up, and Marcus like calms him down in a way that reminds me a lot of what happened in Dragon Age Inquisition with Cole, who is a character who can be read as autistic also. And so that stuff worked really well. There was a mission last night that I played. The one that kept me up was like breaking into Noodle, which is their Google analog.
Perfect. Yeah.
And one of the characters who's in your clique is another black dude named Horatio, aka Ratio, which is a good hacker name if your name is Horatio.
Really good.
And first of all, like, as soon as those two characters spoke on the screen together, they code switch into being like black dudes from Oakland.
Sure.
And it reads and it functions. And it's like, there is again a warmth and familiarity there where you can, it's not just, oh, they're speaking the way black people speak. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh shit, like, I normally run in white circles. I don't get to be this version of me. This is fun. And there's that is a very real thing, and it's very cool to see that represented. And then, like, you get on this bus to go to the Google campus, the Noodle campus, sorry, and you get off the bus, and Marcus grabs Horatio, and he's like, man, I don't feel comfortable here. Like, you and me are the only people who look like us here. And then there's this like 5-minute dialogue that's filled with jokes and it's like actually really funny about like blackness and the lack of blackness in Silicon Valley, the lack of color in Silicon Valley, like the lack of women in, like it's sharper than I thought it would be on those things. Nice. Is what I'll say. And that's coming from Watch Dogs 1, which I think dropped the ball on issues of sexuality, issues of gender, issues of race, like constantly in huge ways, painting with the broadest possible brushes. And even the fact that like the reason you're going there, or one of the ways that you get into that place, is because Ratio, who is your black hacker guy, is also an employee at Google. So like even there, it's not like saying everyone at Google is evil. Do you know what I mean? Of course. Yeah. That said, I am at the end of Act 1. And so there's like the first little bit of tension has been entered into the group. Things go, there was an Act 1 turn, things went bad. Course. Yeah. And now you're kind of on your back foot and you're like, okay, the group is things are maybe not as happy-go-lucky as they were before. And I'm a little concerned that there's going to be like the big dramatic, you thought hacking was helping people, but it isn't, and it's bad, and not necessarily in a way that means anything, like only in that cynical way. I'm a little afraid of that. But there are things that I even there that I think could be valuable. Like the villain's kind of big phrase that he said during your first major confrontation with him is like people don't care how this stuff works, Marcus. Like people just want it to work. They don't care that their data is being used, which I think is the accurate representation of the way we need to talk and think about what the popular perspective on social media is. We're coming out of an election that had a lot of completely false stories find a home on Facebook, and Facebook coming out and saying, like, we don't think that this really had a big effect on the election. So I appreciate that the game is engaged in that stuff, because if it wasn't, it would feel really phony, I think.
I'm.
And it's really. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I'm so happy to hear that, and I'm also annoyed because now I need to play Infinite Warfare and
Watch Dogs
definitely Watch Dogs too.
Yeah.
And so I don't know when this is going to happen.
What is time?
But yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Patrick, you were gonna say something. Sorry.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm really encouraged. Let's say the worst possible scenario is that Watch Dogs 2 walks off a cliff after this first act, right? Even given that, I'm encouraged and would applaud Ubisoft for. It would have been very easy after the original Watch Dogs to ditch any of the stuff they tried to do in that first one, right? Like, it would have been easy to say, fuck it, trying to, speak to race and and complicated matters like this, it's not worth it. Like, we're just not going to do that. We're going to walk away. We're going to totally change the tone. And they obviously they did in Watch Dogs 2. They did change things, but it doesn't sound like they walked away from the harder stuff. It doesn't sound like they walked away from complicated stories. And like, when we, everyone on this podcast certainly was subscribed to this. Like, when we talk about like the benefits of things like diversity, it's the ability to tell stories that are different and more interesting. And that's difficult because it's new. It's difficult because the people may not be in place to tell them or have not done the research to tell those stories. And Watch Dogs 2 appears like that, the stuff with, going to, this Google equivalent and code switching, like, those are really difficult. Like tightropes to walk, and you could really see like that being happening in a pitch meeting and being like, yeah, let's do that. And then once you start writing it, going, oh God, like, wouldn't it be easier to not do this? Because it would be easier.
So much easier. And to not only do they do it, but they do it through a comedic lens over and over and over again. Like, they're not. This isn't a preachy game. This isn't a game that's like, or it gets preachy at moments, but it almost feels like after school special, especially where it's almost laughable in the right way, where it's
like
almost corny.
It's like way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the stuff that's actually difficult is handled with this like we have to laugh about it because it's so fucked up. Which is the vibe I was really needing, I guess, this weekend.
Totally.
And maybe didn't realize it. And I think they're all just lots of other little really smart design decisions that lift the tone. One small thing, and then we can move on, is like, in Watch Dogs 1, you could hold down the profiler button, which is the way that you hacked into CTOS and saw people around you and could read what their things were. And you held it down, and it automatically jumped from person to person as you moved around the world. And so you were just like beset by data. It was just like, oh, this person has 2 dogs, this person has cancer, that person is an ex-felon, that person, reads their spouse's emails. Like, just as you walk through the world, you're just like constantly devouring all these little bits of information. The profiler in Watch Dogs 2 has to be like targeted carefully to use. It's not easy to be awash with other people's information. You really have to take a step to seek it out. And that means that you're not really playing the voyeur as much as you were in Watch Dogs 1. And that's a small thing, but it feels like an important change in characterization through mechanics. Aiden Pierce is the paranoid dude who is constantly reading everyone around him for what they're who they are. Marcus wants to go talk to someone about German board games. He wants to go get coffee. He wants to go watch a bad movie with his buddy and make crack jokes about Tom Cruise or whatever. Right? Like, that's who he is. And so, he'll hack people when he needs to. And just in general, like, there is a real diversity in that group of hackers, that they all feel like they're doing it for a different reason. Some of them are doing it because they're like people who like to experiment with technology, and others are doing it because they came from, really privileged backgrounds and are now trying to reach out and make things better for other people. And I think even that is a really interesting step forward, or strong step forward, that okay, we want to represent that people who do this do it for a bunch of different reasons. So I'm really hoping it holds on. It's really fascinating to me that we got this and Mafia 3 in the same year.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Both of which have really strong performances. Marcus's performance for me is really up there, as he sells it. And there are moments when I can tell either a really smart director or writer changed a line because the subtitle is different than what it is, or he as the actor was like, no, that's not how Marcus would say it. Marcus, this is how Marcus would be. And he is just a really I keep saying strong performance, but like a really personable, like the biggest problem with Watch Dogs 1, no one gives a fuck about Aiden Pierce. Yeah. Aiden Pierce's iconic cap can fuck off.
Yep.
Marcus wears a bunch of different hats. You wear clothes, you buy new clothes all the time. There's a billion different things to choose from. And I think that, again, is just a really good symbol for how Watch Dogs 2 is separate from Watch Dogs 1. It's about a bunch of different options, about being colorful, about being bright, and about trying to make things better, and instead of just kind of wanting petty revenge. So that's nice. That was a
really
nice surprise for me this weekend.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Sounds like a good solve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you do anything else, either of you, or what?
I wrote a piece about Even the Ocean.
You did. That's live now.
Yeah, it's live. It went live this weekend, actually.
Awesome.
And I've talked about it a bit. I'm not going to go on and on about it, but Even the Ocean is a game that's coming out on the 16th. It's a really, really beautiful platformer, and it too has a lot of sort of good sort of weighty sort of story decisions and a lot of diversity, and it's really inherently about organizing power,
right?
And people sort of rising up against leadership that doesn't really give a shit about them. And and it's in this fantasy world. It's in this weird world where there's things like dream soup that makes dreams appear to other people, and weird talking animals and things like that. But I think there's a power in that. I think there's a tremendous power in being colorful and being fantastical and having like gorgeous art and beautiful music, and then also kind of being like bringing it back home and saying a thing and being very, very intentional about the things that you're saying. And the folks who made the game, Joe Nikitaka and I'm going to try not to butcher, Sean Hantani Chen Hogan, I think that's
I'll double check your story.
Okay. I believe that's how I pronounce his last name. They're both just incredibly politically aware people. They're younger. They sort of made their first game as a student project. This is their second game, and they're both just incredibly passionate about things like income inequality and political power and organizing and peaceful protest and sort of all these things that they're also really interested in sort of looking at the sort of phenomenon of the model minority. So the main character in this game is sort of East Asian, and they're both folks who identify as East Asian American, and sort of somebody who keeps doing their job, and the sort of like white mayor of this town is kind of like, oh yeah, you're doing great, keep doing this job, and the main character kind of keeps doing it, even though there's some tension there, and with sort of the folks who are being kind of crapped on. So there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff going on there politically, and it's also a really awesome and fun platformer. So there you go.
Sean Hantani Chen Hogan looks correct.
I hope I did. Yeah.
So
that's really worth.
And you're still playing through some NES Classic stuff, right?
All of them.
It's you and like no one else, because
I know.
it's you and a lot of other people, because it's sold out everywhere.
Yeah.
But also it's sold out everywhere, which means there's a cap on how many other people can be playing the NES Classic. Patrick, do you have any idea what's up with that? The shortages? Or is it short? So like, I guess step one is like, I always keep myself on the sidelines when stuff like this happens, in terms of like what my professional opinion is, when like, you can't find this thing anywhere in stock, because it feels like it could be one of a billion reasons. Like,
I think Occam's razor, like, is it more, is it likely that they are constraining supply because they like the headlines, or would they like to make more money? Like,
right.
And my guess is Nintendo at this point in time would like to make more money. Maybe they, I think it's incredibly likely that the response to NES Classic was a lot bigger than they expected, right. And this isn't. The beauty of digital is that nothing sells out. The problems of physical is that ramping up production is not flipping a switch. Right. It's not, that stuff takes months. It's possible that, after Christmas, they'll manage to catch up with supply, and then, people have forgotten, sort of all of the frenzy around it right now. But, given how Nintendo is performing financially, my guess is they would take every dollar they could. And so the idea that, people have said this over the years, that Nintendo always ends up having short supply. I think that's because Nintendo is a historically conservative company. Yeah. And so they would rather make sure they'll produce this much, sell this much, make this much, and then if they ramp it up from there, they ramp it up.
Yeah,
from
they
there.
don't want a situation where they have a ton of hardware in a warehouse somewhere
Yeah.
where it doesn't sell and is costing them money to keep it stored. That's not a good business policy for anybody, but especially not if you're going to be a company like Nintendo that, one, is making lots of unique hardware, and two, is just deeply conservative economically. And so, like, that's the thing that's, like, I guess the thing that bugs me often is that we are so quick to jump to the sort of, like, conspiracy theory. They're trying to get headlines from this thing. I don't know, maybe I should be more cynical about this, but yeah, I think I'm with you, Patrick. I think this is probably just like, oh yeah, we didn't make enough. But they've come out and they've said that they're going to get more out there this holiday season to keep checking retailers, et cetera, et cetera. Are you still having a good time with it though, Danielle?
Oh, yes.
Awesome.
I've been diving deeply into a Kirby's Dream Land hole, and it's a beautiful thing.
Again, Kirby's Dream
It's
Land.
so good.
It's really beautiful and really unique. So this is one of these like great this weekend games.
Oh, it is. It really is. I'm so glad we all had something happy to play this weekend. It kind of makes me happy that we all kind of had something that was like brought us joy or something interesting or brought, because I think we all needed that maybe.
Yeah, it could have gone bad with Watch Dogs. I was ready for it to go bad at any moment. But it seems like it hung on. I don't think there's anything else Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I was going to say, I do think what's interesting is that in 2016 alone, I think you've seen, whether Nintendo is able to capitalize on this, is an open question. But between Pokemon Go, which they didn't, develop, but, used, a property that is, deeply associated with Nintendo. And I'm genuinely surprised at the sort of like fervor around the NES Classic. I knew it would be a hit, but, it seems like the average person is getting excited for it in a way that is genuinely surprising to me. And you can start to see the shape of how, Nintendo can do something that a lot of other video games, Sony can't do this, Microsoft can't do this. They're a unique company akin to Disney in which they are able to leverage nostalgia in a very, very powerful way. And so it's between Pokemon Go and this, it'll be fascinating to see if Nintendo's actually able to continue doing that in meaningful ways, or if 2016 is just an aberration and it's a lot more difficult to do that than they've made it look.
Yeah. I'm very curious to see too, like how the public carries forward its like love for Nintendo into 2017. Like you said, coming off of Pokemon Go and now coming off the NES Classic, like, are these things that Nintendo can properly leverage to make the Switch a big hit? How does it do that? What's that look like? Is there, will there be some sort of Pokemon game on the Switch close to launch? Because if I'm Nintendo, there should be.
There really should be.
So we'll see. That's this weekend's news curiosity was definitely that, I think. Let's it's Friday, so that it's not Friday. It's not Friday at all.
Oh,
I got really excited for a second.
I'm so sorry.
Awesome.
It's Monday. I'm so sorry. I didn't even get anybody's hopes up. It's Monday, and that means that instead of digging into the question bucket, I'm gonna take some questions from the top.
Skimming from the top.
This comes in from Tallulah. And this actually, I think, connects pretty nicely to the NES Classic and the notion of archival. Tallulah writes, "Hi all, I've been loving the podcast. Thanks. Here is a question. How do you think efforts to archive and preserve video games should respond to the growing presence of games as services or large-scale additions/changes to games post-release? A lot of great work has been done to ensure that the people who missed games at the time or were born afterwards can go back and get a chance to experience them in the future. Through things like good old games or emulation, or again, like the NES Classic, obviously, which is emulation, I guess. But it feels like those games were more clearly demarcated by individual releases when things got changed. So there's like different arcade versions or different console versions, like Championship Edition, Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition, or Super Street Fighter 2, or whatever. Games that have patches," Tallulah continues, "large-scale DLCs or balance changes seem like they might be more difficult to archive. If somebody born in the future wants to see what the deal with Dota 2 is, will they just have the most recent build? Is video footage of the game in older states enough? Multiplayer games or always online games are weird for other reasons like server availability, but this problem is present in games that are solo too. Dark Souls games could be an example. Will someone who entered that series late ever be able to experience pre-patch Shrine of Amana or a curse being able to stack? Are those experiences valuable enough to put into restoring/archiving? Do the developers have any responsibility to preserve those things or supply the community with ways to?
Oh boy. Yeah, I know some folks are certainly, there are sort of museum efforts in certain places, like the Museum of Play, that go into this, and they're starting to look into these things. I personally think that games that have large enough communities and that have large enough numbers of people that really love them, I imagine a future, a better future, where different versions of a game could be preserved. So different eras of WoW or something, different eras of particular games, or even something like Mass Effect 2, where the Shadowbroker DLC actually really, for somebody who was hardcore femshep Liara, it was really important to sort of my playthrough of that game. So that would be the version of the game that I would want preserved. I would hope that efforts would take into account things like communities and things like the sort of the lore that a community builds about a game. The sort of, we talked about the meta a little bit. Something like that would I think have to be taken into account for modern games, which, does make things a lot more difficult. But I'm hoping that, when we're in starships in the, Star Trek future, the computer is so powerful on the holodeck, you could be like, I'm going to bring up 2004 WoW today.
Right.
As I
That's the
play
version.
it in a cafe.
The thing that's tough is so often a lot of these games have things that are server-side only, and those servers go down and aren't available. Like, I was a big Matrix Online player. I was in
that
a
makes
guild.
all kinds of sense for me. Yep, it makes all kinds of sense to me.
I was,
Yep.
it's true.
What?
Makes sense.
The leader of my guild died, and agents attended. Like, not really. It's like in character
For a
she
second, I
died.
was like, oh shit.
In character she died, and agents attended her in character funeral. I really loved the Matrix Online. It was the
that's
best.
amazing.
The Matrix Online, one,
Okay.
looked really cool.
Sure.
2, was ahead of its time in terms of like player run events and players affecting the outcome of story events. 3, there is nothing like playing a character and then seeing an agent like at the end of a road, knowing that the agent is played by a GM, because the Matrix Online live events team filled the world with actual like operated characters who you could role play with.
Okay.
And also
this is
who
incredible.
it was so good.
Yeah.
It was so good. And they would just chase you and like you run. It was a great experience. The combat system was really cool too. But it's gone because the majority of that game existed on the server. There are some attempts to emulate it. There are some attempts to make a version of it that you can play. But so much of the game was not client-side that even efforts to reconstruct it have hit some hard stops in terms of what can be done. And so, like, unless whoever has that server data at some point puts it live, you'll never be able to go play the Matrix Online like as it was. And I was like, oh, it's gone. And so there's also the other thing there, which is that it's also would be gone anyway in some sense, because I'll never be able to attend that funeral for that character. Right?
Sure. And that's such a huge part of the experience.
That's such a huge part of the experience. Yeah. Exactly. Like, I'll never be able to be betrayed by someone in my clan who switches from being the kind of, in that game you were either human-sided, machine-sided, or the Merovingian, and who's from the second movie.
Yep,
That's the whole thing.
I do remember.
And who like switched from one of those sides to the other and betrayed us in the middle of a big like event, a big like combative event. Like that stuff was really cool and like felt really alive for its time, and that's gone. Like no matter what happens. So in some senses, instead of archiving in the sense of like I need to make this available to play forever, there are certain situations where we need to be satisfied with video, but more importantly, we should be doing kind of almost ethnographic like work in recording what the play experiences were like. There's a section from this. There's a academic essay I really like by Andrew Hutchinson called "Making the Water Move," which is about mist and doom. I'll just read this little section. He writes, A convenient indicator of the development of computer speed and aesthetic ambition in games designers during the 1990s is the treatment of water in the Myst series. By the time Real Myst in 2000 came out, the water was fully real-time rendered. The surface of the oceans moved and had surface effects like foaming, and the weather changed as you watched. Back in 1997, Riven had, quote, photorealistic still images of the ocean and managed in one scene to animate the part of the ocean closest to the shore. The oceans of the original Myst in 1993 are completely flat and frozen, without any visual motion on them at all, and look quite ridiculous now compared to any of the subsequent versions. However, it is very important to note that they did not look frozen in 1993. Not only was it not technically feasible to do water effects in 1993, it was not expected. At the time, Myst was the most audio-visually detailed virtual experience ever had on a personal computer. In the same way, Doom's sheer speed of response made it compelling despite its low resolution. Their aesthetic and immersive impact cannot be denied, as surveyed from the sales figures and the press at the time. And because we have that press and people saying Myst is incredible, Myst looks beautiful, we can understand that aesthetic component of it, and in a sense that is part of the kind of wall of archival work being done. It's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily, it's one of the reasons I push to have really descriptive prose in game reviews and game criticism, because don't just tell me it looks good. What's it look like to you? Give me an analogy.
Paint me that picture.
Paint me that picture. Because 10 years from now, someone's going to look at Watch Dogs 2 and think it looks like garbage.
Totally.
I hope games continue to look really cool. And so, but being able to point to a specific thing that someone's written and say, oh, this is what it looked like to them, is part of the archival process. Patrick, do you have any archival feelings? Just archival feelings? Hashtag just archival feelings.
No, I mean, I think you guys, touched on a lot of it. I think the difficulty is, the problem. A lot of the problem with archival issues in video games is that it's a technologically focused medium. The advantage of other mediums is that they're relatively static in how they're presented. With the way that film changes. Yes, there are big differences in how it's been, distributed and the formats, but ultimately, those barriers are far different than trying to. I mean, people still have trouble emulating bits of the Saturn. And that machine came out a long time ago. The PlayStation 3, Lord knows whenever they were able to crack something
right.
like the
cell
technology,
totally.
because it was so unique and weird, and as advanced as our computers are, they're going to have trouble running stuff like that for a long time, provided they even find ways to reverse engineer it. And so that's it's a combination of technology being a hurdle, and then also that game companies just in general tend to only cynically exploit archiving and history when it is for financial profit. Right. We don't really have all the proper mechanisms in place to sort of have a third party. You can submit games to federal databases and stuff like that, but from my understanding, it's all that stuff is extremely behind the times technologically too, where it's just it's not going to be surprising in 20 years that it's going to be tough to find some of that stuff, and that is a bummer. But thankfully, there are people that don't care how much of this stuff is legal or not legal, and kind of go out
right.
there and find a way to make it work. And yeah, I mean, that whole flare up over the World of Warcraft legacy servers, which was maybe 6 months ago or a year ago. I can't remember when all that happened. People, your experiences in Matrix Online were like those people's experiences with legacy World of Warcraft. And for people that don't understand what that means, that's just, the early parts of World of Warcraft have been patched and remade and redone and in some ways made better probably for some people. They just preferred playing in that original world, and there's no way for them to do that. And so people did that on the side. They built up and reverse engineered servers, and then Blizzard shut all that stuff down for copyright reasons, which are understandable from Blizzard's perspective. But these people were, possibly happy to pay for the ability to play a very specific version of this game, but it doesn't exist. And so, that part is a bummer for folks that want to have that very highly specific version of an experience, especially because a lot of it's tied up in nostalgia. It is
a difficult thing for me when I think about the history of video games, or the future of video games, because this is one of those stumbling blocks that very clearly separates games from other artistic media, right? I know how to archive every book. That technology exists. Now, making all that accessible or making sure that original copies don't get destroyed, like obviously there are a number of ways you have to be careful and all of that. But like, oh, we need to make another print of this thing. We can do that. I can take images of this book, and now I have a backup. We film. There are lots of ways to archive film easily and indirectly. Music, same thing. But because of the way technology works, like it's just not that simple with games yet. You know, maybe one day our computers just get so powerful, like you were saying, Danielle, like where we just brute force it. We'll never maybe get cell processors again, but like, we'll just brute force it. We'll take those assets and just brute force it. So the enterprise can do it.
So fine.
But like it is definitely for me a troubling thing, and it's a thing that I would love to see more resources put into, more grant money, et cetera, to like ensure that the people who are at the forefront of this can do it legally and can do it well, you know. So
I have a question.
Sure.
For you. I'm thinking about this, and it seems that the types of games that are going to be much more difficult to archive, they're multiplayer games, and they are games in which the multiplayer aspect is not just, you know, sort of competing, but it's also sort of collaborative storytelling process. And of course, you know, after we had our beautiful tabletop session, I'm now thinking about that. Are there methods like to preserve campaigns in like the tabletop space? Is there anything akin to this in tabletop?
Yeah, so the tabletop space is really interesting because it's not just like, there's two ways to think about this. Like on one hand, yes, you could totally preserve the campaign you ran with your friends by recording it. That's what I do with Friends of the Table, hashtag Friends of the Table.
There you go. Yeah.
Friends_table on Twitter. We do it, and Adam and I, you know, we've done it a bunch of times, and we did it during our 72-hour live stream. So yeah, you can just have a recording of it. But there are also a long commercial history of producing campaigns for people to play through. So like on top of selling you the book that tells you how to run the game, and then maybe a book that has some monsters in it for the person who wants to run the game to be able to use, and some other setting details, for a long time the thing that like was the most constant D&D kind of supplement that you could buy was just like, here's a game for you to run. Like you are the DM and you don't have the time to spend coming up with, you know, skeleton birds and skeletons that can smell farts. Like, if you don't have that time, here's a book, and like just go through the book line by line and read it to your players and read the outcomes, and here are the monsters. And so that model totally works for saving your campaign. I've had people ask me, fans of Friends of the Table, to produce that sort of stuff for the settings and stuff, where it's just like, oh, well, here's the world. Like, you'll never be able to necessarily play in with me one-on-one, but here are the building blocks for that stuff. So that stuff totally could happen on that way. And I think that you could maybe, if you had the right group of people, play the Matrix online again one day, if you had 100 people committed to playing once a week at the same time or something. Sure. But that's a lot of work, and not necessarily something that's easy to get together. So it's weird. And also I tend to resist the notion of cataloging.
Sure. Sure.
I get where it comes from. I understand. I read about this when I wrote about Undertale last year, because I think Undertale was one of those games that was filled with a bunch of weird little side stuff that was really cool, and I know I missed a bunch of it. Sure. But for me, one of the messages of Undertale was that, like, oh, being the person who wants to collect everything is not really a good trait. Like, it's obviously fine if you're that person or whatever, but like, you shouldn't do that at the cost of other things. And that game very cleanly sets up what the cost of going back to collect things is. And so I have a sort of a similar ambivalence about over cataloging my own creative work. Like, I don't want to just say, like, oh, here's all of the prep for Friends of the Table Season 2. Here it is. This is it right here. Because that isn't the thing. The thing is, like, what happened live at the table. Sure. It's cool to have maps. It's cool to do all of that stuff. And in fact, one of the rules that I bring to tabletop gaming nonstop comes from the set of games that Adam's Dungeon World comes from Apocalypse World. I actually don't remember if it comes from Dungeon World or from Apocalypse World, but it's draw maps but leave blank spaces. And like, that is how I like to run tabletop games, and it's also kind of how I feel about the archival of these big old games, these big old MMOs and stuff. Where like, I would love to be able to go back and play. I'd want to make sure that the sort of play experiences that did happen are properly archived, but also we need to be okay with the fact that we can't always recreate the past. Like,
Yes.
we need to use those experiences as inspiration for new experiences, and support the people who are doing interesting things in those spaces. So that's my suggestion. It is the end of our hour here. I don't mean to sound like a therapist, but thank you so much for listening. Danielle, thank you for being in the bunker. Where can people find you on the internet?
Oh, they can find me over here at Waypoint, but they can also find me on Twitter, Danielle RI. And if you really want to go to my Facebook page, it's Danielle Riendeau, writer.
Nice. Patrick?
Wait, are we doing Facebook stuff?
Yeah, we're doing it. We brought it back. We're
Why
back
not?
to Facebook. Actually, no, I'm petitioning. Until Facebook says that they fucked up by not by including
you know what?
fake news on their algorithms. I'm not promoting.
Screw it. Never mind. Just go to my Twitter.
I did just like, well, Twitter, of course, the paragon of virtue.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, boy.
I know.
Patrick, where are you on the internet?
I guess I'm at Patrick Klepek, and I guess maybe I'm at Pete Klepek on Facebook. I'm not sure. You decide.
You decide.
I tell you, you
Right.
decide.
I'm at Austin_Walker on Twitter, at Austin Walker Games on Facebook. I've linked to my Twitter and Facebook now, so there will be content, #content on the
smart.
Oh.
Facebook. You can find all of Waypoint stuff at waypoint.vice.com. We are at Waypoint on Twitter. We are Waypoint by Vice on Facebook. I think that's correct. I think it's Waypoint by Vice.
Waypoint Gaming.
Waypoint Gaming? Is it Waypoint Gaming? I'm checking. No, it's Waypoint Vice on
Waypoint Vice.
on Facebook. So check those out. Obviously, we have a lot of great stories coming over the next couple of days. Shout outs to Dan Rosado, who is our audio engineer today. Shout outs to Tim Barnes, who is our producer. Shout outs to you for getting through this week.
GamerX. Shout outs to GamerX.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay tuned. We have more coming for you this week. Hopefully, we'll do a stream in the middle of the week if our internet holds out this time. And we'll be back on Friday. So check you then. Peace.